I ran another 5K this morning, and I'll be honest, this was not my strongest training month. I traveled to New Orleans, so my routine was off. My preparation was not nearly as consistent as I would have liked. And this was also the earliest 5K I've ever run. So on paper, this probably should have felt harder than all my other races. But once I started running, something surprised me. I paced myself better. Not perfectly, not effortlessly, but for longer stretches. I felt more control than I have in some races where I was technically more prepared. And that made me realize that this race was not really a story about whether I trained enough. It was a story about what experience starts doing for you, even when the preparation is imperfect. So today, I want to talk about what was different for this July 5K, what I noticed about my pacing, and why I think this race may be proof that progress does not always look like becoming faster. Sometimes it looks like becoming smarter. The first thing that made this race different was the time. This is the earliest 5K I've ever done. And I know some runners hear early race and think, perfect, cool weather, get it done before the day starts. I hear early race and think, why are we awake? Because race morning requires our whole system. You have to wake up, eat something, hydrate, get dressed, make sure you have your bib, make sure you didn't forget anything important. Convince your body that yes, we are actually about to run several miles before the sun is even clocked in. And because this was earlier than I was used to, I knew I could not depend on feeling naturally ready and awake. I had to be a little bit more intentional about not starting the race too aggressively just because the adrenaline kicked in. That matters to me because one of the easiest mistakes to make in a 5K is letting the first few minutes lie to you. The beginning feels exciting, everyone's moving, you feel fresh, your watch is giving you numbers you may or may not have any business believing in. And suddenly the pace you plan becomes the pace of the random person running next to you, which is how so many of us end up paying for mile 1 during mile 3. So before the race even started, I knew the real challenge was not just waking up early enough to run. It was staying calm enough to run my own race. The second thing that made this training block different was the travel. This is the first 5K I've completed in the same month where I traveled. And not just a little quiet weekend where I kept my normal routine. I went to New Orleans. I went to Essence Festival. I walked a lot. I was out of my normal environment. My eating, sleep, movement was different. And I had a great time. But I would be lying if I said the trip didn't affect my training rhythm. It did. There were definitely runs I could have done better. There were probably sessions I could have approached with more structure. There were moments where I was feeling like I was trying to return to my routine while also returning from the trip mentally. And normally, that is where I can become a little dramatic with myself. I can look at an imperfect week and start acting like the entire plan has been destroyed, as if one trip means I've forgotten how to run, as if missing one piece of the plan means I now need a brand new plan, a new start date, a new notebook, and possibly a new personality. But this one forced me to practice something I keep telling myself I want to be better at: adjusting without disappearing. I did not have the strongest preparation. That's true, but I also did not completely abandon the race because the preparation was less than ideal. And I think that distinction matters because life is not always going to give me a perfectly protected training block. There will be trips. There will be long shifts. There will be weeks when my energy goes somewhere else. The goal cannot always be to create conditions where nothing interrupts me. At some point, I have to learn to keep going even when I'm interrupted. Now, the part of the race that stood out to me the most was my pacing. During long stretches, I felt better. I felt more controlled. I was not just running until I felt overwhelmed and then trying to recover from that decision. I felt like I was making better choices while the race was happening. And that may sound like a small thing, but for me, that is real progress. Because pacing is not just physical, it's emotional. It requires you to ignore the urge to try to prove something too early on. It requires you to trust that holding back a little at the beginning may help you stay stronger later. And that's difficult when everyone around you is moving like Flash. It's difficult when your body feels good for the first few minutes. It's difficult when your brain starts telling you that slower means worse. This time, I had longer stretches when I felt like I was running with the race instead of fighting it. I was paying attention. I was adjusting. I was not treating every slowdown like an emergency. And even though I was not perfectly paced the entire time, I could feel the difference. That is the part I do not want to overlook just because it may not be the flashiest result. A finish time is easy to post. A medal is easy to photograph. But learning how to manage yourself doing a race, that's the kind of improvement that can be easy to miss. And honestly, it may be the kind that matters long term. This race created an interesting contradiction for me. I was less prepared than I wanted to be, but I did not feel less capable. And I think that's where experience begins to show itself. When you first start doing something, every result feels directly connected to whether the preparation was perfect. If you trained well, you feel confident. If you miss workouts, you assume the outcome will be terrible. But the longer you stay with something, the more your body and mind begin carrying lessons forward. I've run enough races to start recognizing some of my patterns. I know what it feels like when I start too fast. I know what happens when I panic because I need to slow down. I know that walking for a moment does not mean the race is over. I know that discomfort does not automatically mean that something is wrong. I know I do not have to turn every difficult stretch into a full emotional storyline. That knowledge does not replace preparation. I do not want to pretend like preparation doesn't matter, because it absolutely matters. But experience can help you use whatever preparation you do have more effectively. And that's what I felt today. I did not arrive with a perfect training block. I arrived with more self-awareness, more race experience, a little more patience, and better instincts than I've had during some of my earlier 5Ks. And if you're new here, I'm documenting what it looks like to become financially fit, physically fit, and more disciplined without pretending that any of it happens perfectly. I talk about running, money, consistency, travel, and all the real life that happens in between. So if that sounds like your kind of conversation, you should subscribe. I post a new video every Sunday. I think I spent a lot of time looking for progress in the most obvious places. A faster time, a longer running interval, a better picture, a more consistent training calendar. And those things do matter. But I'm learning that the process also shows up in how I respond. Do I panic less? Do I recover faster mentally when the plan changes? Can I slow down without deciding I'm failing? Can I trust myself to make a smarter decision in the middle of a race? That is what felt different today. I felt less reactive. And I think that's one of the clear signs that I'm becoming a more experienced runner. Not because every race feels easy, not because every training month goes according to plan, but because I'm learning to manage myself better when it doesn't. And that lesson applies far beyond running. It applies to money. It applies to work. It can apply to any goal where one imperfect month makes you feel like you've lost all your progress. You've not necessarily lost it. Some of it may have moved deeper. It may be showing up in your judgment, your patience, your ability to adjust, your willingness to continue without needing everything to feel repaired first. This is the same kind of progress I want with my finances. I do not want one expensive trip or one unplanned expense to make me avoid my accounts for the rest of the month. I want to be able to look at what happened, adjust, and continue moving forward. Not perfectly, just more intentional than I did before. Because being financially fit is not about never having a month where life costs more than expected. And being physically fit is not about never having a month where training is less consistent. It's about knowing what to do next. So no, this was not my most perfectly prepared 5K. It was early. It came during a month where I already was traveling. My training was not as strong or structured as I wanted it to be, but I felt something changing. I paced myself better for longer stretches. I made smarter choices while I was running. And I left the race feeling like maybe experience is finally starting to work in my favor. Not because I can stop preparing, but because imperfect preparation no longer means I have nothing to rely on. I have the lessons from every race that came before this one. And today, I actually used some of them. This may not be the most dramatic race update, but it feels like a real one. If you're working on building more trust with yourself in your training, your money, or just the way you return when life gets busy, I linked my free Financially Fit starter kit below. And tell me in the comments, what is one way you've gotten better at something that has nothing to do with the final number? I'll see you next Sunday.